Hello, and welcome to Itinerant Teaching 101. My name is Carolyn, and I've been a hearing itinerant teacher for the deaf and hard of hearing, working in the suburb west of Chicago for the past 36 years. Before I begin today, I'd just like to take a moment to thank Sarah Kiefer and the Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Education at Indiana State University for giving me the opportunity to share my passion for itinerant teaching with you today. As we get started today, I'd like to start with a definition of what exactly we mean when we say itinerant teacher of the deaf or hard of hearing. Sometimes people will call us just itinerant. Sometimes they'll call us hearing itinerant. There's all kinds of names for it, but what it boils down to is this is a traveling position for a traveling teacher of deaf and hard of hearing students. You're going to work with a variety of students in a variety of ages and grade levels, working in a variety of school settings. You may work with students that have additional disabilities as well as their hearing loss. And in addition to that, you may be the one that educates the school community to the needs of hard of hearing students in their classrooms. It may mean that you're in more than one district each week, and you'll probably be in more than one school each and every day. Well, what exactly does a hearing itinerant teacher do? Well, the first is we have direct instruction to meet IEP goals. That's pretty much the meat of the itinerant position. However, you may find that case management, consultation, and problem-solving teams may also add to your job description. You will also be providing consultation support for classroom teachers, special teachers like art, music, and PE, teaching assistants, hearing peers, and other school teams. You may be a member of problem-solving teams, diagnostic teams, audiological teams, and you may be responsible for management and maintenance of hearing-assistive technology equipment. Whenever you see HAT, that's what we used to call an FM system, any kind of assistive listening devices that students use in their classrooms. As a side note, many places have an educational audiologist on staff who monitors this HAT equipment, but in my district, she was not always readily available. So it's important that you make yourself a hearing aid cleaning kit or a HAT equipment troubleshooting kit so that you can take care of those issues as they arise. In your hearing kit, you should have a listening stethoscope or an ear mold that's on a long tube, and your educational audiologist can make you an ear mold, a listening ear mold. An air bowl for getting water out of tubing, a small cup, maybe a small shampoo, like the sample size shampoo thing, a toothbrush, and then a lace crochet hook or a wax pick. Okay, I say a lace crochet hook because they're made out of metal, they're practically indestructible, and they cost about $1. Whereas a wax pick or a wax loop, the little wire loop tends to break pretty easily. And if you buy the smallest crochet hook you can find, you can use it to scoop wax out of pretty much any ear mold. It doesn't work for domes or those kinds of other small, very tiny hearing aid ear molds, but for a pretty standard one, it will work. And then a couple of paper towels and some water, and you are all set to go. A little soapy water in the plastic dish, and you can give a good scrub to an ear mold and clean out that wax, and then blow out the water, dry it with a paper towel, and put it back together again. It's important that you do check equipment at least once a week and maybe do a listening check daily if you see those students on a daily basis. What makes a good itinerant teacher of the deaf or hard of hearing? Well, it takes a special skill set. You'll need all the skills of a classroom teacher plus a few more besides. Some of the personal qualities that I feel make a good itinerant is somebody who's outgoing and cheerful. You're going to be kind of isolated in your position, so the more outgoing you are, the easier it will be for you to make connections with other people. You'll need to be flexible and self-directed because you may not be seeing your supervisor or other colleagues that know what you're doing every day, all day. You may not see them very often. You need to be self-motivated and really a self-starter on a lot of activities. You need to enjoy the variety that you would get in an itinerant position because you'll get kids from kindergarten through high school. Professional qualities that an itinerant really needs is to be organized and resourceful You're going to need to keep track of lots of different things in lots of different places. You're going to need to be assertive so that you can get the things that your student needs. You're going to need to advocate and educate the classroom and the school community to the needs of your students. You're going to need to mediate a great deal of issues that come up between your students and staff in the building. You'll need to be schedule-oriented because you need to be in each place that you say you'll be when you'll be there. You're kind of a jack of all trades for the students who are deaf and hard of hearing in the general education classroom. Some additional responsibilities that a hearing itinerant might have would be diagnostic testing for their regular caseload students or new students, following up on newly identified deaf and hard of hearing students, providing short-term interventions for new hearing aid users or some short-term interventions on coping strategies or listening skills. You may provide for consultation for 504 plans with accommodations for hearing or access to information needs. You may be in charge of monitoring referrals and identification processes for the school hearing screening or some outside audiological evaluations for the specific schools that you cover. You may also be in charge of disability awareness training for staff and peers. Some districts allow itinerants to provide an RTI-type service for listening skills or hearing aid orientation or for new hearing aid users, coping strategies, that kind of stuff. Even if there are no academic issues of note, I understand in Indiana sometimes those students could be served through a consultative model. In ours, it was not really IEP minutes. It was just more kind of an RTI-type service. So who might be on an itinerant caseload? Well, it's always important to check with your specific state or region as to who qualifies, quote unquote, for hearing itinerant support. In our cooperative, we were able to offer services to students that had an identified hearing loss, permanent or fluctuating, as long as we had some documentation of the said hearing loss and that it was having an educational or social emotional impact on the student performance in their general education classroom. Hearing itinerant services, hearing eligibility are always a special education eligibility category. We are not a related service, and we should not be listed on IEPs as a related service. We are a special education eligibility. Some students with identified hearing loss that might be on your caseload would be students with known sensory neural hearing losses that have academic or social emotional impact on those general education performances. Students with documented chronic conductive hearing loss may also be on your caseload as long as you have documentation that the hearing loss has occurred. It's been more than one ear infection, and that chronic conductive is having an academic or social emotional impact on the classroom performances. Students may need to have academic as well as functional skills support. Functional skills would be things that would include things such as hearing aid use and care, communication skills, self-advocacy skills, listening skills, anything that would a hard of hearing student would need to cope in a hearing general education classroom. You may have other students with hearing loss on your caseload, including students with multiple disabilities that hearing loss is just one factor of the puzzle. You may also have newly identified students with hearing loss that are just learning to use their hearing aid or have just received an FM and are learning how TAC system and are learning how to use that. But hearing loss is not really impacting them academically. You may also have students on your caseload who are having social emotional concerns relating to their loss of hearing or their ability to communicate in the classroom or with their peers. And they may need some additional information on coping strategies or listening skills. All right, so let's get started. At the beginning of the year, you should contact all of your schools that you will be servicing. Explain who you are and who you will be seeing. Usually this contact is the school secretary, but it may be the school principal or the student service coordinator, the guidance counselor, or even the special ed department chair. When you speak to these people, the things that you need to request would include things like the bell or school schedule with the beginning and ending time, lunchtime and lunch period for, let's say, if like there are 2 lunch periods and one's for kindergarten, first and second, and the second is, third, fourth, and fifth. Just need to know who's assigned to which lunch period, what time recess is, some of the special schedules like the art schedule, PE, library, etc. You also need teacher names and contact information and your high school or middle school student schedules. Also, you'll need to ask for a mailbox, a key, and a potential spot to work. This may be difficult because you really don't have a schedule yet, but if you know, on Tuesdays and Thursdays you'll be in one district, you can mention to the secretary that those are the days that you will probably be there. You'll also want to work with the IT department to get electronic access so that you can use the online IEP information, have access to look up student grades and email address, and you may have multiple email addresses, one for each district. Try and direct them all to one inbox so you don't have to keep logging in and logging out. Be careful, too. You may need IT approval to use copy machines. You may need to get a copy code. You may need to get on school news blasts, email news blasts. So when they send out each month or each weekly, news notes for the schedule for the next week, you want to get on each school list so that you know when there are assemblies or field trips, testing, those kinds of things. Also check for the security policies in each one of your districts. You may need a door code or a key fob so you can get into each one of your buildings. You may have to be buzzed in every time you arrive at a building. You may have to sign in and then sign out again every time you go into a building. However, you are not a substitute, so you should not need to surrender your driver's license or your keys every time you enter a building. You should have a key to lock the classroom that you're working in, so in case there's any kind of emergency like an unsafe drill or whatever, you can lock the door and keep your students safe. Also know that you need to find out about parking regulations, because you don't want to get a ticket because you parked in a visitor spot for too long and they don't realize that you're a teacher and you're in the building on a regular basis. So step 2, what's next? Begin building your schedule. You're going to start with your high school students, then your middle school students, as they have the least amount of flexibility. You're going to make a giant chart in pencil on scratch paper using 6 columns, the time in the first column, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, cross, and then block out 15-minute chunks in the rows going from your required start time to required end time, and then pencil in each student as you secure a time. For high school and middle school students, we usually take them out of their study hall if they have one, or their resource period if they have one. If all else fails, we usually wind up taking them out of PE due to the fact that we don't want to be taking them out of an academic class. So they're kind of locked into the times that they have available. So try not to use a flex schedule day of the week. One of my schools, the high school, had 2 mornings a month was a late start day. And on those late start days or early dismissal days, the schedule was shifted. And so that changes all the rest of your days scheduling. So just try and be aware of that. And if you can possibly avoid it, go on the days that they don't have late start or early dismissal. Also try and find a building level buddy, contact person, secretary, or a department chair who will contact you when your students are absent, so that if there's an unexpected change in the schedule, so you don't make a trip to a building where your student is not there today. It's also important to distribute a paper packet or electronic packet of information about having a deaf or hard of hearing student in your class to each teacher that your middle school and high school students will see. Make sure to add your contact information and then give them a blurb about an additional in-service will be set up, to take place in the next several weeks. It's important that they know the students are coming, even if you haven't really been able to have face-to-face meetings with each one of those teachers yet. My students make an introductory brochure and a slideshow sharing their hearing needs, their accommodations, their interests, what they'll do to make sure they'll be a successful listener in the classroom with their teachers each year. And I send out their slideshow ahead of time before I meet with teachers, before I send out the electronic packet, but as soon as I have their schedules, I will make a blast out to all of their teachers so they know what's going on and who those kids are. And then I share the brochure with them when I meet with them face-to-face. There is a copy in the resource packet of what we use for our teacher brochures. Now that you've got your middle school and high school kids tentatively penciled in, beginning with the students you see the most often, add them to your blank schedule template. Usually students are like 30-minute blocks of time or one full class period. Some people like to use little Post-its on a big grid and just move the Post-its around. I just usually use a pencil and scribble them in and then erase them and scribble them in. And when I get them definitive, I write them in pen. Then I know for sure those people are resolved. Include all of your students' direct service minutes, including any consultation minutes too. If you have them, not every kid has consultative minutes, but a lot of them do. Try not to schedule your 1 or 2 day a week students on Mondays and Fridays due to all of those holiday schedules. And try to arrange your schools in some sort of logical way. For example, from the furthest away to the closest to your home, or from the closest to the furthest away. Just try not to go back and forth to the same school more than once in a day, and try not to wind up going back and forth from one place to the next and then back again. And it just adds to the mileage and takes up too much of your day for travel time. But it may be difficult also to add that plan time and lunchtime slots until you have most of your students with the least flexibilities, middle school, high school kids, daily students, already in your schedule. But be sure to include a lunch and a plan time, because you can't teach without a plan, and everybody gets crabby when you don't have a lunch. So some scheduling hazards to be aware of are to make sure that you include a plan time every day. Contract allowed us 30 minutes of planning time a day. Make sure to give yourself a lunch period as well, and not really a driving lunch. If at all possible, try to have your lunch at a school building, because it's an excellent time to meet other building level staff and hear about your students kind of informally and collect any possible referral information about new kids that have popped up. Know that if you're in a hurry, somebody's going to want to stop and chat with you, so try to leave a little bit of flexibility in your schedule to do this as well. Try to see your desk several times a week. Try to allow for possible road closures or railroad crossings, or following a tractor down a country road, or construction delays, because they will interfere with your schedule as well. If you are going to see students back to back at a building, which I highly recommend, be sure to leave enough time between students to switch out materials, walk a student back to class, and get set up for the next kiddo. Be aware that it takes time to leave a building, pack everything up, leave a building, especially if you have to sign in and sign out, travel, get to the next school, pack everything into the building, sign in, and get set up for your next student. It takes more time in cold weather to pack yourself up and unpack yourself, as well as to travel, so kind of be aware of this as well. Also, make sure you leave a little time to use the restroom. Some days get a little busy, and that one is the first thing to go in your schedule. So let's begin the year right. Now you've got a schedule going, and now we want to assure success for our deaf and hard of hearing students. General education, teacher education is the best way to ensure a successful year for your deaf and hard of hearing students. Sharing information on the impact of the hearing loss on academic and social skills can certainly smooth the way for your students. You may be only one member of your student's team. Interpreters, note takers, educational audiologists, speech language therapists, reading interventionists, they all need to understand that impact of hearing loss. Know you may explain your role multiple times in multiple ways. Teams may not understand that general knowledge, background knowledge, and vocabulary difficulties may show up as kind of reading comprehension issues. For example, if you've never heard the word volcano and then you're asked to read and answer questions regarding a paragraph on volcanoes, you may have some difficulty comprehending the passage. You may also find that educating the school population is an ongoing job. So let's start the year with teacher in-services. Teacher in-services should be done each semester for each teacher for each student. Should try to hit these within the first 2 weeks of school. Usually set up a 30-minute block or so. Sometimes it takes a bit longer. Use any handouts and video demonstrations to promote understanding of hearing loss, hearing aids, cochlear implants, or hearing-assisted technology. Handouts can include picture audios, the ear team hearing loss forms, that these describe potential impacts of hearing loss, tips on how to see the students, that kind of stuff. A list of accommodations and support, IEP information, hearing-assisted technology information, troubleshooting tips, substitute teacher information guides, closed captioned media account information, and maybe a brochure made by the student. There are examples of all of these things in the resource packet that comes with this webinar, so take a look at that. But when you're in the classroom talking to the teachers, be sure to examine the classroom as well. Look for the deaf and hard of hearing student seat location and any noise issues in the classrooms. For example, a heating vent, fan, door noise, windows. Look for visual access to where the teacher usually stands, and be sure to share captioned media information so that they can get their own captioned media account. Think about HAT connectivity issues and charging stations for HAT equipment. Reinforce the needs for visual access to information that's presented in an audio format, especially in classes like a foreign language class like Spanish, where they might be taking a test on headphones, where they're listening for a vocabulary test or whatever. Your student would probably benefit from a face-to-face presentation of that information. Also remember that online assessments may need direct audio input, closed captioning, or other types of assistive devices. So be sure the teacher is educated in that area as well, because you don't want to be working on that the day that the test is on. You may want to give the teacher in-services jobs to your high school students as they become more knowledgeable about their hearing loss and their need for accommodations and support. But once you get to know your students, perhaps at the semester or trimester change, you can have them help or run their own in-service. It's a great way to increase their self-advocacy skills and independence, and creating those teacher brochures for each student to explain personally their own hearing loss and its implications and their accommodations, their interests, their strengths, their weaknesses is also a really great way to reinforce with students their personal information. These are a list of some of the resources that I have found useful in my years as doing teacher in-services. The Karen Anderson website, Success for Kids with Hearing Loss, is a really great website. Has a lot of really good information that you can use. YouTube has a lot of great movies, video clips, and demonstrations of how we hear. There's a really nice Flintstone one that the kids all enjoy that kind of shows you and the levels of hearing loss. So take a look at those. It is really powerful for teachers to hear what it sounds like to listen through a hearing aid or a cochlear implant or a HAT system. So just kind of be aware that sometimes those things have really strong implications for teachers. So look at the resource slide and then see if any of those will work for your classroom in-services or teacher in-services. The next thing to think about is doing a classroom or peer support in-services. The main goal of a peer in-service is to educate hearing peers to the unique communication needs of deaf and hard of hearing students in the general education classroom. Hearing topics can be ears and hearing, listening games, hearing aids, cochlear implants, HAT systems, sign language, deafness, and its implications. But if you begin each year with a classroom peer in-service, you will eventually have a very educated peer group, especially if you do this kindergarten through 5th grade. By the time the student then reaches middle school, FM systems, hearing aids, HAT equipment is all commonplace. It's no big deal, and students just see it as another part of the tool. So that educated peer group really will help smooth the way to middle school and high school when a lot of students get a little bit less willing to use their equipment and their hearing aids. Many elementary age deaf and hard of hearing students really want to share their stories and introduce you to their to their friends and show their cool equipment. You can use it as Star of the Week, or it's just important that you educate the classroom peers to the communication difficulties a hard of hearing student might have. It's important to identify noisy places in the school, like music, PE, assemblies, fire drills, and difficult listening situations like the cafeteria, where noise can be an issue, or recess, where distance can be the problem, or group work, where quiet voices and noisy classrooms can be the problem. It's usually good to remind the hearing students that the deaf and hard of hearing students do want to work with them and do want to play with them, but they may not have heard their name being called in a noisy situation, and that sometimes moving closer or getting their attention first may be very helpful. So let's start with tuning fork fun, all right? It's very easy to get a tuning fork. You can buy them online. There's a lot of science supply places that have them, and they're relatively cheap. And a ping pong on a string, probably a string about a foot and a half long, and the ping pong ball, just tape the string to the ping pong ball, and then you can use the tuning fork to show students what sound waves look like. When you tap it the first time, you can show them how the tines of the tuning fork looks fuzzy, and that's really what they're seeing is the sound wave. You can hold it next to a still ping pong ball, and the ping pong ball will bounce as the energy transfers from the tuning fork to the ping pong ball. You can start the tuning fork vibrating and put it in a bowl of water, and the water will splash. So be ready, but it will also show you that transfer of energy. Using a vibrating tuning fork, you can also transfer energy through a table, through a chair, through the metal chalk rail, under the whiteboard. Any of those kinds of things can show you how powerful a sound wave can be. You can also use a tuning fork to demonstrate what conductive hearing loss is kind of like by starting the tuning fork vibrating and then holding it by the handle, placing it on top of a student's head while they plug their ears with their fingers, and they'll be able to hear the hum of the tuning fork inside their head, and they'll get quite the kick out of that as well. But it does kind of show you how a bone conduction hearing aid might work. My favorite of all time classroom in-service is to do a parts of the ear in-service. The first thing you'll need to do make this one work is to make your own ear parts. So grab a pile of construction paper, some markers and scissors, and get out your artistic genes and get going. The first thing I would draw is the pinna, and that would be in the shape of an ear or the shape of a catcher's mitt if you're very artistic. Then an ear canal, and basically just a long tube, but I do add wax and hair cells in there because we talk about how wax can sometimes cause a hearing loss. Then a drum for the eardrum, a hammer for the hammer, an anvil for the anvil, and a stirrup for the stirrup for the little bones inside your head. A cochlea is a snail shell shape with hairs in it. One of my students who had a cochlear implant used cute little Velcro stickers to attach a string that looked like the electrode for his cochlear implant, and then the string went up to, believe it or not, a paper plate that he used to show what his magnet inside his head was kind of like. And then you need the auditory nerve, which is just a bundle of paper strips glued together, or you can, if you're not that fancy, you can just use another little long tube, and then make the brain that looks kind of like a cloud shaped with lots of lumps and bumps. And I do label each piece with pinna, ear canal, eardrum, hammer, anvil, stirrup, cochlea, etc. And then we laminate the parts of the ear so that they hold up a little bit longer and a little bit better. And then we proceed to do the classroom in-service. The classroom in-service is how we hear. So explain each part of the ear as I go along, asking for volunteers to come up and stand as part of the ear. I talk about, as we go along, what problems could happen in the pinna, what could be a problem in your ear canal, what could be a problem with your eardrum or those little bones. Going along, talking about different kinds of hearing loss as we go along, and pointing out specifically where my student's hearing loss is and how that can help or hurt their understanding in the classroom. When we get to the cochlea, I make sure that I talk about how loud noises can damage those hairs in there. And once they're damaged, they can never really be repaired. So we talk a little bit about being careful with headphones and extra loud noises. And we talk about how our students really had no say-so in the functioning of their cochlea, and if it's not working well at certain sounds, I make sure I point out that, maybe at a high frequency would be really hard for the student to hear. Then we play the game telephone, varying the listening conditions and the length of the directions, and using some easily confused words. So the first go-round, I have the classroom who are non-participants be totally quiet, and then we pass a simple direction down the line of the ear, something like stand up and say your name. And then I usually have the teacher in the classroom be the brain, and I let them sit, wherever it is they were sitting at the beginning of the in-service. And then I just make sure that they're far enough away that they can't hear the ear people passing the message down the parts of the ear. So I also make sure that my deaf or hard of hearing student is the pinna, because then I can be assured that they get the direction correctly and they have access to that information. I can talk into their FM. I can sign the information. I can make sure that I have their visual attention when I give that information to them to pass the direction down. So they pass the direction down. We go over to the brain. The auditory nerve runs over to the brain, tells them what to do. The second time through, I have the audience participate as well. I have them, I teach them to sign for start, stop, and again, so that I can have control of the group. I tell them I'm going to ask them to sing the ABC song, and to start when I sign start, and to stop when I sign stop, and then they can either snap their fingers or clap their hands quietly as well while they're singing. And then I have the ear people do this again with a more complicated direction, something like stand up, turn around 3 times and touch your nose or touch your toes. And then we do the whole thing all over again. And then when it's complete, I ask the folks sitting on the carpet, the audience, if they notice the ear people doing anything differently, if they changed something, if they had to repeat more often, if they had to speak louder, if they had to get more attention or whatever. These are all then translate into things that are good tips for communicating with a deaf or hard of hearing student in your classroom. Then I ask the ear people if they did anything differently as well. And I usually end my in-services with a chance for kids to listen to what FM system or PAT equipment sounds like or hearing aid sounds like with my listening stethoscope. So try to collect a tuning fork, a ping pong ball on a string, some used ear molds, cleaned of course, some non-functioning hearing aids or cochlear implants. Sometimes you can get those from Advanced Bionics or Cochlear America, and they can give you a model of a cochlear implant. Ear tubes, if you can get them, earplugs, model of the ear that you could order through like a science website, and then your homemade parts of the ear. Keep them in a large zip-top bag or a folder so you can just grab it when you need it. One book that I did use with kindergartners that worked out really well last year was Freddie and the Fairy, which gives 3 little easy lessons on how to talk to a deaf and hard of hearing student, and it's not quite so complicated. So now you got all your classroom in-services done. You got all your teacher in-services done. What's the daily life of an itinerant look like? First, what do you teach direct service students? Well, these are the students that you're going to see on a weekly basis, based on their degree of hearing loss and the educational impact of it. Typically anywhere between 30 minutes a week to 255 minutes a week. It may go higher depending on that student's needs. But this is language, expressive and receptive, auditory training, including use of their residual hearing, auditory discrimination, the ling sounds test, listening tests. You want to be able to have them try a listening check with their friends using maybe those ling sounds, speech reading, visual and nonverbal information to support their hearing, coping strategies, how to be a deaf, hard of hearing kid in a hearing world, communication strategies, anticipatory strategies, repair strategies, perspective taking, listening skills, how to follow directions, how to manage their hat equipment, how to clean their ear molds, maybe reading skills, including phonemic awareness and rhyming, word families and sight words, And also comprehension strategies like inferences and answering questions. You may do some writing with structure of writing, word choice, or organization, and always vocabulary work, including multi-meaning words, content-level vocabulary, word strategy studies like prefixes and suffixes. There's no end to the amount of language things that you can teach for your direct service students. So you need to get yourself organized. Start with a folder for each student. It can be a binder, it can be a pocket folder, whichever way you want to sort your things out. But make copies of information ahead of time, maybe like a unit of material, so you do not have to worry about whether or not you have materials copied. I usually, if I'm doing, let's say, an anatomy of your ear unit, the parts of the ear with my little kids, I'll have ear parts, and I'll have drawings, and I'll have games, and I'll have kind of worksheety kinds of things, and I might have Play-Doh, and I'll have all of that together in their folder. But I will also have additional following direction pages, maybe some auditory to scrim pages, all of those copied in the folder so that I always have something right there ready to go for each day, and I don't have to copy every day. Have a bag, box, or crate, one per school, with each kid, those kids in that school's folders in that bag, box, or crate. A pencil box with supplies that can be left at each school. Find some sort of storage spot at each building so you can leave materials or folders. I have even gone so far as left folders in my mailbox. You can leave them in the corner of the room you use. Or in the copy room, find a cabinet and let the secretary know that you're going to be storing materials in there. Label it with your name and title, and then say, please do not remove, because people will take your pencils and pens and tape and whatever and walk off with it. Also get a tote bag or a rolling backpack or some other bag with pockets for organization and a closable top. Weather happens, and you'll be very happy that you don't need to dig through your trunk for your materials. You just have to grab your one bag with your plan book, etc., in it and go. No, snow and rain will fall into your trunk and into your bag and onto your materials, and you don't want to ruin all of your hard work. So do look for something with a bag or a tote that has a zip top at the top. One source for good bags that I found that has lots of pockets and the zipper top is 31. I'm not a salesperson, but 31 usually has very nice bags. The small utility tote with a zipper top was one I used for many, many years, and it's really quite handy. So the next part, organizing your life, is to get yourself a plan book of any kind. It can be a plan book. It can be a binder. It needs lesson planning pages. It needs a place for a consult log, who you talk to and when you talk to them. A hearing assistive technology service log, important contacts, and a student information page, including the student's audiological, their parent contact information, birth date, school contact information. There is a page in the resources folder that has a copy of the student information page that we have used. You're going to need that information at your fingertips, and you may not be at your desk when you need it. So you may not even have electronic access. So a binder of information or a self-made plan is really helpful. Write down names, phone numbers, job titles of everybody. Add them to your phone or your plan book. You think you're going to remember them, but there are going to be a lot of them. So it's really important to make sure that you have that information organized. Okay, organizing your life 3, the email edition. Google can be your friend. Use and link your Google calendars for all of your schools, so that way you'll be aware of assemblies and field trips and those kinds of things that are coming up, testing schedules, those kinds of things. It's important that you go in your email list and set up distribution lists, one for each student's teachers, for example, Carolyn's teachers, and then you would have all of your middle school teachers that Carolyn sees. So you can write one email to all of those teachers and not have to individually send out emails. You might want a parent list where you can have all of your students' parents. So if you have a sign language information sheet or whatever, to send out to everybody. Student services team, a classroom teacher list, case manager list, any of those kinds of things that will help you to write one email as opposed to 6 emails. Also, try and think about like a 6-day email list, distribution list. So, for example, all of your Monday schools or Tuesday schools or whatever. And so when you're sick, you just have to send in your one email to all of your schools, and they know that you would not be there to see those students, and then you can go back to bed. Also, organize your inbox. So you have a folder for each student, and maybe like a follow-ups on folder or a consult questions folder, something like that. Try and handle each email and then file the email in the appropriate folder. So you'll have less hanging around in your inbox, and you'll have a record of all of the contacts you've made. Make sure you use the BCC part of an email to send a copy of your responses to parents if you want to keep a record of what you said to those parents. So if you put, like the parent, let's say you're going to send out a sign language information sheet to all of your parents, put the parent distribution list in the BCC line, put to yourself in the mail line, and then send out the email. That way you have a copy of what you've sent out, and all of your other parents don't have everybody else's email. Same thing with the teachers list. If you want to send a note out to Carolyn's teachers, put the teachers in the BCC, Carolyn's teacher BCC list, and then email it to yourself again so you know what you've sent, and then you have a copy of that information. Consultation and collaboration is a big part of the hearing itinerant position. In addition to direct service minutes, these are the additional duties that an itinerant does that contribute to more successful outcomes for deaf and hard of hearing students. Who will you be consulting with? Well, there's quite a lot, and this is by no means all of the people you will be talking to. You'll be talking to a lot of people, and you will probably be talking to them very often. Keep your list organized by school and or by students. Put it in your plan book, your phone, on an index card, whatever. It's just really important that you remember who goes with which people and at which building, and when you talk to those people. So very important to make sure that they understand who you are. Teachers and staff do not understand the role of the itinerant teacher. You need to become a visible face in each building that you serve, and you need to meet the principals and get them on yours and your students' side. It's easier to get communication access for your students if the staff sees you as just a member of their building level staff. Personal introductory emails at the beginning of the year and periodic information sent out as an email blast can be very helpful. But when a student with a significant communication issue comes into a building, like an interpreter or cochlear implant student that they've never had one before, or some remote closed captioning service or whatever, it could be a good idea to do a whole building in service. So everybody knows you and the community can all come together to help ease that communication for that student. Using those soft foam earplugs, you can get giant bags of them on Amazon or at a building supply store for pretty cheap, can go a long way towards helping an adult staff person to realize how difficult life can be with even a small hearing loss. If you're proactive and you educate the school community and the support staff and the others in the building about who you are and what your role is, life will go much smoother for you, and you will become more integrated into that school community. They don't understand that your primary responsibility is to your deaf and hard of hearing students. So they may think you're only in the building and then you go home. But it's important to give copies of your schedule and changes in your schedule to school secretaries and other service team members, including teachers and supervisors and those kinds of things, so they know where to contact you if you're not following your regular schedule that you've given them at the beginning of the year. Try and keep a log of all of your consultation contacts so you remember who you spoke to, what it was about, what follow-up is needed, and who's going to do the follow-up. It's just really important to keep good, clear records about those, and those count as consultation minutes for your students. There is a list in the resource guide of things that might be considered consultative services. One part of the hearing itinerant job is also student assessment. Annual reviews, 3-year reevals, case studies referrals, all that paperwork needs to be completed in a really timely manner. And you need to be organized and stay on top of that. So how are you going to stay on top of the paper trail? Well, find a good calendar system, paper or electronic or both, whatever works for you. Add the due dates at the beginning of each year for each student's annual review. Add the due dates for each student's reevaluation that are due this year. And then add an alert like 2 months before they're due so that you can be aware of things that are coming up and you don't get into a time crunch. Notify your school teams far in advance because you may be able to complete an evaluation in a month, but I can guarantee you the teams in your buildings will not be able to do that. Once you kind of get a handle on when everything is and you're getting closer to those 2 months out, notify the parents and supervisors to get tentative dates that will work for them to hold those annual reviews and 3-year reeval. Then notify the classroom teacher of those tentative dates and possible times. I like to look for times where my classroom teacher might have PE or something where she can come for half an hour and then not have to stay for the whole meeting if she doesn't want to. But do check with your building for their sub policy. Some places the teacher has to request a sub so she can go to meetings. Sometimes it's the building level secretary that does that. Sometimes there are certain days in the month where there's a floating sub. Those things are really important to look at so you make sure that there's someone covering the general education classroom while the teacher is at your meeting. So what data do you collect for these student assessments? Well, the first thing you need is a recent audiological, usually within the last year or so. Classroom feedback from the general education teachers. In the middle school, it might be from all of the teachers. Elementary school, just the classroom teacher. There is an example of a feedback form in the resource packet as well. You may want to do some observational data, maybe sitting in a classroom for a half an hour, watching your students and how they work, checking out their listening environment and their advocacy behavior. You want to check with parents for information regarding what their concerns are. And then you want to check language skills, listening skills, auditory to scrim skills, maybe some general information knowledge, and then some advocacy skills. Expect results for hard of hearing students to be kind of a zigzag line on subtests in language and vocabulary and listening. When all areas are assessed and they're all low, it may indicate that there's something else in the mix in addition to the hearing loss. There are some tests that we've used, the listening test, the token test for children, which is the following direction test, Wetman auditory to scrim test, test of auditory perception, test of adolescent language and adult language. The Mid-Valley team developed a specialized skills curriculum assessment, which is kind of an advocacy assessment that we put together that goes with our specialized skills curriculum. And also the listening inventory for education revised, that's available online for free as well. When you collect all of your information, the first thing you need to do is ensure that you have accurately calculated the chronological age of the student. There are more mistakes with the chronological age of a student than in any other part of the testing assessment. Make sure you accurately score the test, paying careful attention to the basal and the ceiling level. How many mistakes get you to that ceiling level? Make sure you accurately score the test. Then begin to interpret the data and be careful if you're going to use age or grade level comparisons. They are not the best and most reliable, and they're very prone to misinterpretation. Standard scores or percentiles are much more accurate and are less prone to those mistakes. Be careful of dashes and dots. 5-2 is an age level or a chronological age. 5.2 is a grade level. And sometimes those things can get confused. Make sure you're using the right norm table and the correct part of the school year. Like there may be 3 norm tables, one for the beginning, one for the middle, and the end. Make sure you got the right table if there is any difference. Double and triple check your math, especially for chronological age calculation. Super Duper makes an age calculator app for iPads and iPhones that can double check your math for you. Anytime that you have a gap or a zigzag line of ups and down scores, the discrepancies between the subtests are usually a sign that hearing loss has impacted that area. And so the lower subtests are where you're going to target your goals for the next school year or for the new student. So what's so great about this job anyway? Well, I passionately believe this is the best job in the world. It can be lonely and frustrating, but it can also be joyful and unpredictable. I believe you get to develop a deep relationship with students and their families. You may actually have a student from the age of 3 all the way to 18 years old, from their intake meeting at 3 to their graduation from high school. You become a trusted ally, mentor, and advocate. You develop trusting and collaborative relationships with school staff and classroom teachers. They come to see you as an expert on deafness, and they value your input when they have questions or concerns. You get to teach a variety of ages and grade levels and disability levels. It's so interesting. The kindergartners just love being in there, and the high schoolers, you get to talk about college and life after high school. You get to teach multiple subjects, multiple strategies, and skills. And there's usually less building level responsibilities. So no bus duty, no lunch duty, and no recess duty. Yay! You also have the flexibility to schedule your day, plan what you teach and how you teach it, and what materials you want to use to get your message across. You get to enjoy fresh air, rain, wind, snow, and occasionally some sunshine. You do have more independence, but you have more challenges, and I feel more joy. I hope you come to enjoy this job as much as I have. It's a wonderful way to make a living. I'd really like to extend a special shout out to the Mid-Valley Hearing Itinerant team and Sharon Jenkins especially for all of their support and collaboration through the years. If you have any questions or any additional information, I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to contact me at carolyn.viracles@gmail.com, and I'd like to send an additional thank you out to Phil Greenwood for his assistance in recording this webinar. Thank you.